All right, hello everyone. Today is Thursday, August 5th, and this is the Cluster API Provider Azure office hours. As always, we abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct, so please raise your hand and be respectful to everyone in the call. If you'd like to raise a topic, please add it to the agenda open discussion section. And if you need access to this agenda, you can join the SIG Cluster Lifecycle mailing list. All right, so let's get started. Oh, and if you can, please add your name to the attendee lists also. So I don't see any new faces here today, so I'm going to skip the welcome. Let's just go straight into discussion, I guess. So the first, the first three are mine, but let's take them one at a time. So first one, the first thing I wanted to bring up is I noticed there was a lot of churn in the Azure managed cluster area recently. Lots of really great improvements and PRs going in, a couple of bug fixes, and I was thinking since that area is emerging to be quite distinct from the rest of those self-managed clusters code, and that it's been most of the code has been written by a couple of different people, which are mostly not the same people that are writing most of the code for the self-managed clusters. That it might make sense to add like a separate owners file. That would be a subset of, or not a subset, but those files are a subset of the overall code base. So any of the overall maintainers could still approve PRs, but it would allow the people in that owners file to also review those PRs independently and have maybe more targeted reviews for those files. I don't know what people think, if there are any opinions or dissent on this. Nader?
I think it's a good idea, but also if you're thinking about adding ACE, it's probably can be a maintainer in general, like for everything. But also it's useful to have the separation for the future, as it's like growing a little bit different than the rest.
David?
I was actually going to say the same thing as Nader. ACE has been contributing a lot to the project, and I think it would be great to, recognize that.
Yeah, +1 to that. I will talk to Ace because I don't know if he has the bandwidth to take that on officially. But also in general, I haven't talked to anyone that I was thinking of adding to that file, so that would be something to see if they're willing. But also in general, I was thinking of adding a few reviewers, not necessarily approvers for managed clusters. So like the people mostly who have been contributing a lot lately. So Loken, I don't know if that's the first name, but Loken RN, I think like his GitHub handle, and maybe Nicola, if you keep contributing in that area, if you're interested in becoming a reviewer.
Yeah, it would be interesting to do, yeah, definitely.
Cool. So I guess action item is I will reach out to those people to see if they're interested in being reviewers, and then I'll reach out to Ace to ask him if he'd prefer to be a project maintainer or a Azure managed cluster maintainer. Cool. Any other questions or comments? All right. Next topic is so we have an open issue for renaming the master branch to main branch. It's been open for a while, and we said we would wait for the Alpha 4 release to be out before doing that, just because we didn't want to break all our test signal right before the release. I think now that we're past that, we're in a good place to start thinking about it again. Fortunately, the Kubernetes maintainers or Kubernetes Contribex group has made it pretty easy, and they've outlined like exact steps that you need to make before and during the transition. So I think we just need to follow that. So the two things I wanted to figure out here is like, first of all, was there anyone who was interested in taking that on, like being the owner and like maybe delegating some of the tasks to others? And the second thing is when would be a good timing in terms of doing it? Matt Boersma.
It seems like this week would have been a good time to do it because there are fewer people paying attention as far as although there's still been a lot of activity, but sooner rather than later, obviously, because ripping the Band-Aid off is a good thing. Do other projects or CAPI have a timeline for when they were going to switch that we should coordinate with, or is it okay to just do this independently?
I think it's okay to do it independently, but we should definitely post on Slack about our intentions to, see if we should coordinate, if anyone thinks we should coordinate with the other projects. I think GCP has already done it, so they're ahead.
Okay.
And AWS have done it as well, like a few weeks ago.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so we're probably behind at this point, so we should get it done. David?
Yeah, any thought to getting the Calico patch in there, and then then cutting a release? Is that something that we are interested in doing? The only reason I'm saying it is it seems like that's pretty close, and if we get that in, cut a release, move the branch, just would that be easier, or would moving the branch be easier?
Yeah, so I don't think moving the branch would prevent us from cutting a release or anything like that. It's just that it might disturb the testing, like on PRs for a little bit. So if we wanted to get that merged, it would, I think, probably be better if we merge it first. As you said, it's pretty close, and I think from Nader's investigation last night, it's just missing a configuration that I need to go and update. So I can do that right after this meeting, and we can try to get that merged today, and then target the branch change for tomorrow. Also, since it's the Friday, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing that it might be down on the weekend. Actually, it might be a little better if we do it Monday, so that we're all around to fix it if something goes wrong. But I don't know what are people's thoughts on that. Nader?
What happens if it's broken on the weekend? Because then I think one of the things that will happen when you change the branch is it will trigger tests on all like the different PRs. So maybe it's a good thing to get this out of the way on the weekend when there's less things going on.
Yeah, that was my thinking too, but it might block some new contributors who are weekend contributors. That was my only worry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so I guess, yeah. Oh, Matt?
Sorry. Yeah, I'd love to help with this because for whatever reason, I really like kind of Git stuff, but I'm going to be gone until Wednesday, so I can't if we're going to do it right away.
Okay, well, so I guess I don't know if, I don't think anyone else volunteered, so I wouldn't mind doing it, but I don't think there's like a huge urgency to do it right now, but we should get it done soon. So we could also I could also do some of the steps, because I know some of the steps need to be done before that happens. And so that might not be instant, because actually we need to get some PRs merged in case infra, we need the appropriate reviewers and approvers to take a look at them. So we might not even be able to do it tomorrow actually. So what I propose is that I can try to get all the groundwork layout done by next Wednesday, get all those PRs in place so that we're in a good place to actually cut over when you're back, and you and I can coordinate on that. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Yeah.
If there's things you want to delegate to me, I can work on that stuff on Monday.
Okay, I'll take a look at the the list, there's like a to-do list, and we can like split up the items if there are a lot. Thanks.
Although don't wait for me to get back if things are straightforward and proceeding. But I'll be happy
Okay.
to help if there's stuff to do on Wednesday.
Sounds good. Thanks. All right. Cool. I'll skip over this one and let's go to the last one first. All right. David, I added an item because I saw you said something in a comment about we should discuss this in office hours. So let's discuss it.
Fantastic. So that item is using a service principal directly without actually using NMI or anything else. The reason why I wanted to bring it up, or I thought it would be good to discuss, is to kind of talk about the use case and understand whether or not we want to support it. So the use case is really, I don't want to run AAD pod identity, or I can't run it. And so for whatever reason, I need to use a service principal only, and that's the only way I can make this work. Is that a reasonable scenario? Does it even make sense? Can we run AAD pod identity wherever we want? Is there a reason why somebody wouldn't want to run, AAD pod identity? And if so, is this a viable solution? Anybody have any ideas?
I can give an example, just not about Azure and AD pod identity, but about AWS and KIAM, for example, which is, I believe, a similar app for the similar purpose, like AD pod identity. So in our experience, we noticed that some use cases from some customers can cause KIAM app to crash a lot or to get restarted a lot. So in general, it can add, a little bit of pain when it comes to operations. So I could assume that maybe customers like that would maybe like to try not to use it if they had the option not to use it. So if there was an option like that, for example, in CAPZ, if we can imagine a scenario where AD pod identity is causing some issues because it has some bug or whatever, it might be a good alternative to have an option not to use it and just leave CAPZ controller take care of everything. If that makes sense. It's a theoretical situation, but we had experience for another provider.
Nader?
I haven't really looked at the PR too much, but like, what are we losing by not using NMI? I remember when we started doing that, we wanted to use NMI because it's already like tested, established, and we know it does all the things the right way. So what are we losing by just doing the thing ourselves?
So we aren't really losing anything. The token client for auto rest will do the right things. What we lose is code complexity. So we lose on code complexity. It becomes more complex. We have more permutations of identities. That's a loss. It is not quite as simple. So there's just more documentation for it. We gain, on the other hand, the ability to not have a dependency on AAD pod identity if we don't absolutely need to. And I guess I think that's pretty much it. Like, can anybody think of another like positives or negatives?
So that seems like negative, like what we lose if by adding that option, right? Or by not adding that option. But what about, let's say we say, okay, this is a valid use case for some users, so we should have that as an option. And we have both side by side. What are the reasons that we should encourage someone to pick, using pod identity versus just using this? Like, what do they gain out of it if it's the same thing? I think is Nader's question.
So the way I see it is, we've had folks complain, or not complain, but open issues for stuff like, I'm already running AAD pod identity of this version. I don't want to run it from the version that you're using, or I can't run it from the version that we are putting out in the infrastructure YAML. So I'm going to use my version of it. Perhaps at some point, we end up having an incompatibility issue there, or maybe it's not right. They have it configured to watch only certain namespaces or something. This can start to be a little bit painful. So I think this lends flexibility to be able to not have to configure AAD pod identity, not have to use it, and have something a little bit more self-contained.
So I completely understand what the value is of not being able to not use pod identity. My question is, what is the value of using it? Like, now that there's this option on the table, why would someone choose to use pod identity? Is it more secure? That's the question. Nader?
Yeah, I guess I was trying to ask as well, like maybe this is like the future version that we don't want to have pod identity anymore, and we can have both at the beginning, and then if everything is like, all right, now with this way, then we can remove the dependency. Would that be our goal?
I think pod identity is the right way forward, in that it does, as Cecile was alluding to, and I think she already knew the answer. But pod identity is probably a more secure solution than writing service principals to files. And pod identity A will say you're using user managed identities, or at that point, pod identity enables you to have a rotating secret that's deployed by the Azure Fabric, so that you don't have to worry about rotating a service principal and then redeploying your machines, because you need to make sure that that service principal is in the azure.json file on an individual machine. The secret gets rotated for you. It is a better solution for long-term use, and for lowering the amount of like operationals day-to-day kind of stuff that you would have to do. But it does say, you have to take a dependency on this other piece of infrastructure.
The one tricky part that I remember, because I worked on adding pod identity, is that we couldn't figure out a good way of making it an optional, installing it optional. So to solve these, like to serve the value of having this feature, is that you won't install pod identity, and I don't know how you would do that.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Like this feature I think is good. I think what we want is to have pod identity be recommended, and then if you can't use it for some reason, you can use this to like opt out. But we also need an option to like disable installing it altogether. And I think those should be separate. Like those are two different things, independent, because you could want to not install it because it's already installed on your cluster, but you still want to use it. Or you could want to not install it because you don't want to use it ever. Or you could want to still install it, but then some clusters use it, some don't for some reason. I don't know if that's a really valid use case, but it's possible technically.
Well, it looks like we all agree that this is useful, plus some other stuff that we still need to figure out.
Is that indeed consensus?
Shyam, it's your PR. What do you think?
So I think the main complexity is like making it optional. So that's where like I think we didn't find a good way of like making it optional. The only thing I could come up with was having a replica field and making it 0 if they want to disable it. But but the CRDs still get installed, the cluster binding CRDs. So that's where we were kind of stuck.
Yeah, and folks will still see NMI, crashing because host port is already taken. So I mean, we just need a better solution for having a different infrastructure template or templating in an infrastructure template.
If the replica count is 0, there should be no pods, right? So there shouldn't be a crashing NMI pod.
That's deployed as a daemon set.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Nicola, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I have one more example, actually, specifically about AD pod entity. So if there is no one, if we have an option not to use it, so it increases complexity on CAPZ side. But on the other hand, for somebody that wants to use and deploy CAPZ, for them, the complexity is lowered. So it's less complex. There's one less thing to deploy. We had an example a few months ago. So soon Transform will be moving to using CAPZ and CAP in general, like completely, fully in production. And we have a different way of deploying apps and services to our clusters. So we are deploying in our task currently, and it will be like that also in the future. We are not using this exact same way to deploy CAPZ, like you can read in CAPZ repo, but we have a different way. We package our manifest differently. I mean, we use the same code, it's the same project, and not modified, but we deploy differently. So having AD pod identity in there, for us, it was an additional task. So we had it before, but it was like an optional app that our customers could use. And now it's not optional anymore. So it's something that we have to package up a little bit differently now, and we have to deploy it as well. So it was an additional thing to take care of, and also to take care of in production, during ops work as well. So overall, like more work.
So another thing we could do is, so we could merge this change to like allow opting out cluster per cluster. But in terms of installing it, we could publish like a separate infrastructure components manifest that is without AD pod identity, like AD pod identity completely removed. And then have like cluster CTL still use like the one with AD pod identity by default, and have it be like the most, like that's our 90% use case. We think most users are going to want it. But in some cases, if you do want to like opt out, here's the template, or here's the YAML spec for installing CAPZ without it. And you might have to, go the old kubectl apply way to get it there, or whatever your installing mechanism is. I think you can also pass into a cluster kettle. You could also pass in like a file source or like a link, but I think that might just be the release. I don't know if you can specify a different file name. I have to check. Nader, David, what do you think?
I think having the separate infrastructure YAML is probably the best idea. So you can choose whichever one you want, but it's just you have to be careful of which things we test, like run our tests, because just to make sure it's covered and like things don't get broken and we don't notice.
Yeah. I think we have to support it one way or another. I'd almost like to see a feature flag around AAD pod identity if we were going to release something that allowed you to not have that infrastructure around. I don't know. I'm not sure. I have a lot of thoughts bubbling around about that.
Well, we said this PR is doesn't have to be tied on figuring out how we're going to install things differently. So we can get this done and then think a little bit more about and investigate how to do that, make it optional install.
Agreed. +1 to the PR, and Shyam, thank you so much for working on it.
Cool. All right. Let's move on if no one else has anything on the topic. All right. So just wanted to talk a little bit about a proposal that I've been working on. It's in the PR queue. If you haven't looked at it, please take a look. I'm looking for feedback. And I've been working on the code while this is being reviewed. So I'll have a POC to show pretty soon, but it's still in progress. And basically the idea of this PR is I'll just give like a little summary, and then I can answer any questions if there are questions. Let me see, how do I view file? Okay, so the TLDR is right now when we've talked about this before in office hours, but when we create Azure resources, we block on the completion of the operation. So if we do, or create or delete. So if we do a put or a delete, we'll like send that put to Azure, and then we'll poll Azure until that operation is complete and we can return. So what this means is essentially if like a virtual machine creation takes like 2 minutes, let's say in like a bad day, then it would mean that for 2 minutes, our controller loop is stuck waiting for that creation to complete, and it's not doing anything else. That also means that it's not returning any information to the user. From the user's perspective, things are hanging. They're not seeing any updates. They don't even know that the creating has started. And it can be quite slow. And that also means that if you have like, let's say 1,000 machines that you're trying to deploy, and you only have a concurrency set to 10, which is the default in our controllers, that means you'll process 10 virtual machines at a time, which means you'll wait for the 10 to be created before moving on to create the next 10, and etc. That could take quite a while if you're in a dynamic environment like cluster autoscaler. So what I'm proposing is that we follow this pattern that has been set as a precedent in Azure Machine Pools by David, which it essentially stores the state of that long-running operation in the status of the object. And it uses that to like check on the operation the next time around. So instead of waiting for an operation to complete, let me show you the diagram. So let's look at delete for a second because it's a little easier. But basically, whenever you start a resource deletion, the first thing we'll do is we'll check, was there a previously running operation? Do I know about a previously running operation? And if there is no long running operation in progress, that means that you're doing this from scratch. So we'll attempt to delete the resource. And also, yeah, so you'll delete the resource, which means you'll send a delete call to Azure. And one little difference from what's been done in Azure Machine Pool, and that's taken from Shyam's proposal earlier that I'm doing here, is I'm waiting for the thing to complete for X seconds. Right now that's set to, I think 5, but I'm playing with that number. And that basically just say like, if it is a short operation, like relatively short, done in a few seconds, then we can wait for it, that we don't need to like requeue later. If it doesn't complete before that timeout, then that means we need to store its state for later. If it does complete, then we don't need to store the state anymore. We make sure it's empty nil. And then whatever, no matter what happens, we always end by updating the status to set the conditions of the object. And then going back, if you do have a long running operation in progress, then instead of trying to delete, you try to see where that operation is at. So you pull the status from Azure, and if it's done, then you can update the status and say things have changed. My resource is now deleted, so I'm in that good state. If it's not done yet, you just requeue. And so I think right now we're requeuing to like say requeue in 15 seconds. that way, if we don't immediately requeue, because that wouldn't really be like, that doesn't really give us much advantage, because then like it's probably not going to be done in, you know, a few milliseconds if it wasn't done now, but in 15 seconds, there's a good chance that it might. So those numbers I'm still trying to play with to like find what's optimal and trying to like do different performance testing to see which ones will work best. But yeah, a slight difference with create or reconciling. And by the way, those are like, this applies to like all the, like if you're familiar with the code base, the Azure services. So like, for example, this would be like a virtual network delete. And for reconcile, the slight difference is that before creating, we do like a get. And we're not doing that consistently in every service right now, but I'm hoping we can change that to be a little more consistent. And the reason for that is that if you look at Azure API, actually I have it open here, great. API resource and limits, you have more reads than you have writes, right? That's a very common pattern. And reads are cheaper generally. So you want to do a read to help you avoid doing a write if possible. So every time we do a get, we say, is the resource already there? Does it have everything it needs? If it does, then skip the writes. We don't need to do a write, and only do the write when it's absolutely necessary. So we use those wisely. For the delete, it's a little different because deletes are actually cheaper than reads. So we're not doing a get before the delete. We're just deleting every time, just trying. And if it's already deleted, then great, we move on. So this is the general idea. Where's my, okay. That's the general idea. What else should I show? Oh, this is like a full reconcile of a like entire Azure cluster reconcile loop. So note that every time there's a, it's not very zoomed in, but every time there's a context timeout exceeded in one of the services, we short circuit out of the loop. And this is once per service as well. So the significance of that is that if you have several resources in the same service, so let's take public IPs, usually we reconcile multiple public IPs per loop. Like you have a public IP for one load balancer and then you have another one for another load balancer. That would like, we'll try to do all of them before we like exit short circuits, because the assumption is, and I explained this in the doc somewhere, but the assumption is that a public IP will not depend on another public IP ever. And so it's safe to do those in parallel or concurrently. So even if one of them is not done, we can start doing the other one. So we'll kick off all the public IP creates or all the public IP deletes. And then if any of them is not done, that means we can't proceed to NAT gateways. So we like short circuit and update the status. And then maybe the other last thing I want to mention is a proposal on adding a bunch of new conditions. And this is, yeah, so this is like all the conditions and the reasons that I'm proposing we add. And it basically give like a way more granular like status update on which resources exactly have been created already and which ones haven't. So that's what would be updated in that update status here. So yeah, that just wanted to show that and give like a little chance for like questions, like live questions, if anyone has like read through it and has questions or comments. But if you haven't read through it, I would love your feedback. Thanks for the comments in the chat. Any questions? David?
So the ordering of resources, And this is something that we talked about, and I just wanted to bring it up because there were two async reconciliation proposals, and there's two types of asynchrony or concurrency that we are looking at. This one is still serial in the way that we are approaching resources, which is not entirely the order in which they could be done. So there is still another opportunity for optimization after this, where we could build a DAG of resources and do a few in parallel of multiple services, and then another set, and then another set. And this is really applicable, I think, mostly or only for cluster, but that was basically the heart of the other concurrency proposal. So I just wanted to bring that up, and great work. The proposal looks really great, and I hope folks will read through it, because it's actually a really, really cool look at how to use Azure and use it well.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually documented this as an alternative, the parallel reconciliation, and noted that it could be done in the future. It's not mutually exclusive. And also note that in the non-goals, I also wrote increase or decrease the overall duration of a reconciliation. That's very important. That means this proposal is not trying to reduce the time it takes. It's just trying to do it in a way that we have a faster reaction time, we improve the UX. And also there's the case of like the in the end game, like of having many machines or many many machines. I don't think you can have many clusters. You could technically, but yeah, you could create those like concurrently and start off the creates before like they all finish. And that's where you would gain time. Like if you're trying to create 200 VMs, but on one VM, you're not going to gain any time. So yeah. Any other questions? Cool. All right, that's all I wanted to show. Feel free to reach out if you have questions once you read it and you want to talk about it. I think this is all we have for today. Does anyone have any other topics they want to discuss?
Oh, sorry, David.
Go ahead, Nader.
I just want to say quickly, if anybody has any PRs that are like they can close or like finish off before we start renaming, that's probably helpful, because everything will get triggered off on like all existing open PRs. So if you can finish it off or close it, if it's not like active, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also if you have a PR that's like waiting for reviews, that's ready and it's just waiting for people to review it. I know we've gone a bit behind on some of the PRs lately because we had less people and people go on vacation and everything, but please ping us and we'll try to take a look and unblock you so we can get those merged. All right, David?
Sorry, I was trying to fill in the doc at the same time. Matt and I have been, and also Dane Thornton, have been looking at machine pool machines, and the proposal is open in CAPI. This will start to move, the idea there is to move machine pool machines, kind of what we did with Azure machine pool machines, up into CAPI. So to be able to provide machine representations for machine pools. So if folks have some questions, comments, feedback, please take a look at the proposal when you have some time. And yeah, love to get points of view. Does anybody should I give an overview of how, like, the solution to the reasons or the problem we're trying to solve, or do we just want to leave the proposal out there?
Is it the same as you've done here? Like same idea, right? Same concept, but applied to API?
Indeed. So there's a lot of common functionality for machines, health checking, node drain, a lot of stuff that we had been doing internally in CapZ that are already available in CAPI. And if we're able to represent machines at that level, that also adds a level of abstraction to allow other components like, say, Cluster Autoscaler to address CAPI machine pools and deployments in a similar manner. So it's really exposure at the generic level and reuse of functionality that already exists.
Cheyenne?
So this is a question very specific to cluster autoscaler. Like I was thinking that cluster autoscaler like scales the resources based on the replica count. This is something I didn't know that it deleted the individual machines. So that's, do we really like need cluster autoscaler to know about the individual machine, or does it only care about the node group and just reduce the number of replicas?
That is a really fantastic question. So Cluster Autoscaler has a lot of really cool logic to be able to look at what nodes are least used and what scheduling would be impacted by deleting individual nodes. For us, when we do like lower replica count, what happens is we just go and tell the virtual machine scale set, hey, we're lowering the replica count. Actually, that's not true. Let me rewind. If we were to tell VMSS to say, hey, we want less replicas, VMSS has no idea what is scheduled on those machines. And it would just shoot the machine, and all of a sudden that workload there has been preempted without any kind of like safe, coordinate drain. So we actually delete individual machines, but first we go through a coordinate drain where we drain off the workload, move it out to other machines, and then we delete it. So you don't want to be running a web app and all of a sudden your user gets disconnected, and hopefully the load balancer helps you out at some point. You want to do that proactively. You want to drain workload proactively. So we can't actually rely on VMSS just to decrement the replica count. From the machine pool level, we can decrement the replica count, and then we handle it appropriately in the CapZ layer. When we move up machines at this point, then replica count can be decreased, and CAPI can pick a machine to get out, or we can just assume the replica and count and delete the appropriate machine. Cluster Autoscaler adds more logic to that and picks the best machine to get rid of.
Got it. I'll also like take a look at the code.
So I actually like thought the same thing, Shan. I thought that we only changed replica count. And I actually started like on the prototype a few months ago to get machine pools working with Cluster Autoscaler. And I got it almost there. Like it's pretty much all there except for this one function that is basically not possible for machine pools. And what it does is it deletes a specific node. And so you need to be able to, and the way we do it for machines is by annotating the the cluster API machine to say that it should be deleted. And for machine pools, we can't do that. And I think there's another reason for that. I think the reason is Cluster Autoscaler. It doesn't only deal with like scaling up and down the replica count. I think historically it also has a functionality to remediate unhealthy nodes. which arguably is like a little outside of its scope, but that's what it does. And so the provider implementations of cluster autoscaler have to implement that delete node function, which will delete an unhealthy node. So that's also why we need that.
Cool. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. I actually have a question for you, David, on this proposal, but and Matt. So what happens if a provider wants to use like the provider capacity directly at some point? Like, let's say I'm a provider who's implementing my infra machine pool, and my infrastructure allows like I don't know, like allows auto scaling or something with draining. I don't know. Let's say one of the providers integrates Kubernetes functionalities into like their implementation of machine pool, and they want to be able to like auto scale without using the CAPI draining code. How does that work? Because that was the original promise of machine pools, is you can rely on your cloud provider directly instead of having CAPI orchestrate your machines.
So that's a really awesome question, and I would love that. Can you add that note to the proposal? We need to think through that a little bit better. Right now, I don't know how we do that because we have a actual replica count on the machine pool. So as of right now, we still don't take into auto scaling. We don't take it into account at all, which is an omission, right? So at some point, we need to be able to, I'm not sure if like setting, replica count is desirable in that situation, or if replica count ends up being, hey, either replica count or auto scale with minimum kind of setup. Maybe min and max auto scale with like omitting replica count. But this is definitely something that's a really awesome question and something we need to think through.
Yeah, I think that's something the Kappa provider was doing well, especially because they didn't have autoscaler working at the time, but kind of like ignoring the replica count and just letting that be handled by the, and then using the cluster autoscaler provider for AWS, not the CAPI one.
Yeah, I think it's a bad practice to ignore the, oh, I'm sorry, Nicola, go ahead.
No, sorry, it's that's what we had to do in our implementation of Azure Operator. Exactly. So we used only, for now, we are using only CRDs from CAPI and CAPZ. And since we are running Cluster Autoscaler in regular Azure mode, so Azure provider for Cluster Autoscaler, in quite a lot of places, we had to make sure that we are ignoring machine pool replica count. So Cluster Autoscaler can do its job regularly. And just to add what the situation that Cecile described about cloud provider AHG, for example, or BMSS having some implementation where they take care of draining the workload. It's not far from that, but there can be a similar situation to that where people are using some of those apps that watch for instance metadata service, and then they watch. We use that, for example, in our Azure implementation. So we watch for machine termination events, and we drain the nodes automatically. So it's not like something that Azure provides, but there are Azure supports mechanism, so you can implement that actually on your own. And I guess that would be probably in conflict if a cluster autoscaler would try to do the same thing. And I think that AWS, for example, even has, I don't know if it's official, but in AWS GitHub repo, GitHub organization, there is an app to do that. It's quite maintained well, I think.
Yeah, there's a call out in this proposal about spot instance utilization, where we haven't filled it out completely yet, but that's one of the scenarios, right? You want to catch those events, and you want to have the node notify like Kubernetes that, hey, I'm going away, draining cord myself, and then take me out, right? that is definitely something that needs to come into play there. And the way that would feed upward is that we're looking at having infrastructure references exposed from the infrastructure provider machine pool implementation. And so those infrastructure references, as one of the machines goes away, it should also be cleaned up in CAPI. I think it needs to be paired with what you're saying, Nicola, with something on machine that's going to catch those instance metadata notifications, and something we need to describe in detail here.
Yeah, for Azure, it's a little bit tricky for spot VMs because you get only 30 seconds to do whatever you would like to do. So yeah.
So I'm curious if you looked at this proposal. It's actually been under review for a while and needing more reviews, but that was exactly the discussion that we were having on one of the comments. Yeah. So basically this is proposing that we use the termination handler for like interrupting spot instance workloads. And the big difference with Azure is that we only get 30 seconds. And so I'm not sure that the proposal as is would work well. So we need to, work with them to see how this integrates with what you're working on.
Yeah, I'll take a look at the proposal.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, for auto scaling, Nicola, if you're interested, I would love to see like an issue or a proposal around how to enhance machine pool to better handle autoscaler functionality, because like you're saying, replica count goes right out the window. Really, it's more like min max and or maybe some setup configuration. In some way, we have to be able to mark replica count as, hey, this doesn't even matter anymore. This is useless information, and it would be great to get that solidified before we move it out of experimental.
Okay, cool. I'll try to write up something. I can tell you what we did. Transform. We added, so it was a sort of a quick fix. So we added annotations for cluster autoscaler, and the logic is simple. So if the annotations are set, we use those, and we ignore replica count. Otherwise, we use replica count. But it would be definitely nice to have some more robust solution in CAPI. So not sure what that could be, but yeah, I will give it a thought.
All right, I think we're at time. Thanks everyone, and I'll talk to you on Slack.
Thanks everybody. Great comments.
Yeah,
Bye.
great discussions. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.